It was a normal summer afternoon in Pinewood. Three siblings walked into the local plaza and vanished without a trace. No screams, no struggle, just empty echoes where laughter should have been. In the days that followed, every lead went cold, every hope wavered, and the town realized they were facing one of the most baffling disappearances in decades. It was a sweltering August afternoon in 1957 when the Whitman family's world quietly began to unravel. The small town of Pinewood, nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, rarely witnessed anything more alarming than a wayward cow or a minor car accident along the main road. Yet, on that day, the ordinary would dissolve into a nightmare the town would never forget. 12-year-old Henry Whitman, 10-year-old Michael, and 7-year-old Sarah had been looking forward to their weekly excursion to the Pinewood Plaza, a modest but bustling shopping center on the outskirts of town. The Whitmans were careful parents, protective yet encouraging of their children's small adventures. That morning, Mrs. Whitman, a woman of meticulous habit, reminded the children multiple times to stay together, to keep an eye on one another, and to return before 6 o'clock. Henry, the oldest and self-appointed guardian, nodded earnestly, a mixture of responsibility and excitement lighting his eyes. Michael, ever curious and mischievous, could barely contain his energy, while little Sarah clung to Henry's hand, her small voice echoing a mixture of enthusiasm and apprehension. Their father, Mr. George Whitman, drove them to the plaza in their light blue Ford, parking in the lot closest to the entrance. He made a point to watch them enter the doors, standing by the passenger window and waving until they disappeared inside. The Whitmans never imagined that by the end of the day, those simple acts would feel like the last moments of safety they would ever witness. Inside the shopping center, the children dispersed briefly to explore. Henry insisted they stick together, but Michael's curiosity drew him toward the arcade at the far end of the corridor. Sarah clutched Henry's sleeve, watching him go with wide eyes, hesitant, but trusting her older brother. For an hour, the trio moved among the small stores, laughter and chatter filling the air. Then, somewhere between the record shop and the snack counter, they vanished. Not in a dramatic chase, not amid screams or chaos, but as if the crowd itself had swallowed them whole. The first to notice was a store clerk at the plaza's dime store. She glanced up from folding a pile of cotton shirts to see the children no longer within view. She assumed they had moved on to another section, perhaps the toy aisle. But as minutes stretched into 10, her unease grew. Henry's father had always emphasized vigilance. Surely they wouldn't wander far. She informed the manager, who walked through the aisles, calling out softly at first, then with increasing urgency. Back in the parking lot, Mr. Whitman's eyes darted between the entrance doors and the lot. He waited, first impatient, then alarmed, as the minutes ticked by. By 20 minutes past the hour, he entered the plaza, heart racing, calling out the names of his children. Henry, Michael, Sarah, his voice cracked with rising panic. Shoppers glanced with mild concern at the anxious man shouting through the corridors. Some offered help, others simply muttered about lost children as if it were a common occurrence, unaware that the situation was anything but ordinary. The police were called at 3:45 p.m. by a trembling Mrs. Whitman, who had rushed to the plaza after learning her husband had searched inside to no avail. Officers arrived promptly, combing through the plaza, questioning staff and reviewing what limited security footage was available. Though in 1957, such footage consisted mainly of grainy black and white film, covering only the main entrances and a few corridors. Nothing unusual appeared, no signs of struggle, no suspicious individuals lingering, no vehicles idling near service entrances. The children had seemingly evaporated. What followed in the subsequent days was a nightmare of conjecture and frustration. Volunteers organized searches throughout Pinewood and the surrounding countryside. Officers interviewed neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have seen the children that afternoon. Henry, Michael, and Sarah Whitman had no known enemies, no reason to leave on their own. Yet, as the hours turned into days and days into weeks, the trail grew colder. Letters were sent to neighboring towns, radio announcements aired, and local newspapers ran photographs on the front page, pleading for information. But nothing came. Rumors began to circulate, as they always do in small towns faced with inexplicable tragedy. Some whispered about a wandering stranger in the area days before the disappearance. Others speculated the children had run away, perhaps lured by promises of candy or adventure. Yet those closest to the Whitmans dismissed such theories. Henry, the eldest, was level-headed. Michael, though curious, was cautious. And Sarah, only 7, was described as timid and easily frightened. It was inconceivable that they would vanish willingly. The investigation widened. Detectives from the county seat were brought in. They examined the plaza's layout, interviewed employees, and reconstructed the children's steps from store receipts and eyewitness accounts. One notable sighting occurred in the record shop, where the shopkeeper remembered seeing Henry flipping through a stack of jazz records while Michael peeked at a display of toy trains. Sarah had been sitting on a low bench nearby, tugging at her brother's sleeve. After that, no one saw them. The footage from the arcade entrance revealed nothing. Shadows of other shoppers passed where the children should have been, but the camera captured no sign of them leaving. Among the investigators, a quiet unease took root. There were no physical signs of abduction in the immediate area. No vehicles had been reported in the lot behaving suspiciously. No unusual interactions had been documented. And yet, 3 children had disappeared without a trace. The case became a puzzle with missing pieces, each lid dissolved into dead ends. As weeks turned into months, the Whitmans clung desperately to hope. Family members organized vigils, community members placed flyers in every shop and school, and a small shrine grew near the plaza entrance. Yet each day that passed without a word from the children carved deeper lines of despair into the family's faces. George Whitman, once steady and reassuring, now spent nights wandering the empty corridors of the plaza, replaying the afternoon in his mind, wondering if there had been something he missed, a glance, a gesture, a fleeting shadow. Mrs. Whitman sat for hours by the window of their home, staring at the street where they had parked, willing herself to imagine the children returning through the gate, alive and laughing, though each day the possibility seemed more distant. Local media began to document the unfolding tragedy, and soon the story reached statewide attention. Pinewood, once a quiet town of predictable rhythms, was thrust into the national spotlight. Journalists arrived with cameras and notepads, asking the same questions that the town itself had asked in vain. How could 3 children disappear without a trace? What had happened inside the bustling plaza while dozens of adults milled about? And perhaps most haunting of all, why had no one seen anything suspicious? No one heard a single cry for help. By the end of 1957, the official investigation had yielded little more than speculation. Detectives had interviewed hundreds of people, retraced every conceivable path the children might have taken, and explored every tip received from anxious citizens. Still, Henry, Michael, and Sarah Whitman remained missing. The plaza, once a hub of mundane activity, had become a symbol of unresolved terror. As the Whitman family tried to rebuild some semblance of normalcy, the children's absence hung over them like a shadow that would not lift. Neighbors offered condolences, teachers whispered words of comfort, and strangers sent letters and gifts in a feeble attempt to ease the unending pain. Yet the central question persisted, unrelenting and unanswered. Where had the Whitman children gone? And why had the world allowed 3 young lives to vanish in the span of an ordinary afternoon, leaving behind only echoes of laughter that would never be heard again? The disappearance of the Whitman siblings would come to define Pinewood for generations. Parents became more vigilant, children were warned against wandering alone, and a sense of unease settled over the town like a persistent fog. The case was transferred from local authorities to state investigators, yet, despite all efforts, every lead remained cold. Some began to whisper that the children had been taken by someone who knew exactly how to disappear without leaving a trace, a terrifying thought that haunted parents far beyond Pinewood's borders. And so, the summer of 1957 closed with no answers. The Whitman children had vanished from the ordinary world, leaving behind nothing but questions, grief, and a silence that refused to be broken. Where are you watching this video from? Leave your location in the comments below. I'm always curious how far these stories can travel and how they manage to connect us across every distance. And now, let's continue the story. The first weeks after the disappearance had left Pinewood reeling, but as the calendar turned from September to October, the investigation began to take on a more organized, methodical structure. The Pennsylvania State Police had now assumed command of the case, bringing in seasoned detectives who specialized in missing children. Among them was Detective Samuel Price, a man in his late 40s with a calm demeanor that belied the intensity of his mind. Price had seen cases of disappearance before, some ending in tragedy, some resolved with miraculous returns, but nothing in his experience prepared him for the peculiar absence of the Whitman siblings. Price arrived in Pinewood with a small team of investigators. Their first priority was the Pinewood Plaza itself. Forensic techniques in 1957 were limited, yet Price insisted on retracing every step the children might have taken, cataloging every entrance and exit, and speaking with every employee and shopper who had been present that fateful afternoon. He began with the records of the stores. Receipts, sign-ins, and any minor transaction might yield clues, however small. In the record shop, the manager recalled Henry and Michael examining the merchandise, Sarah nearby, tugging at her brother's sleeve. Yet no one saw the children leave. Every store along the path offered similar accounts. Everyone remembered them, yet no one had seen them depart. As Price reviewed the plaza's layout, he noted that several corridors intersected at less conspicuous doorways. Service entrances, usually reserved for deliveries, were largely unmonitored. The detective considered the possibility that someone with local knowledge had orchestrated an abduction, taking advantage of these quieter passages. However, the surrounding parking lot was open and visible. Any vehicle approaching or departing would likely have been noticed. Officers canvassed the area, spoke to passing motorists, and even questioned the small number of long-haul truckers who occasionally used the lot to turn their rigs. No reports indicated suspicious activity. Meanwhile, the Whitman family was brought in for interviews, the emotional toll evident in every word. George Whitman, tall and formerly composed, now spoke in fragmented sentences, haunted by the image of his children stepping into the mall, unaware it would be the last time he saw them. Mrs. Whitman described the morning, the drive to the plaza, and the repeated warnings she had given, her voice cracking with each recollection. Detectives noted the consistency of their statements, finding no evidence of misdirection or deceit, yet the absence of the children remained inexplicable. Detective Price also sought to understand the children themselves. He requested school records, spoke with teachers, and reviewed letters the children had written in class. Henry, the eldest, was responsible and protective. Michael was adventurous but careful. Sarah was timid, yet trusting. None exhibited tendencies to run away or wander off without supervision. The profile suggested that whatever had occurred was neither accidental nor voluntary. The investigation took a subtle turn when a local woman, Mrs. Lillian Harper, came forward. She ran a small diner near the plaza and claimed she had seen a man loitering near the main entrance on the day of the disappearance. According to her, he appeared to be in his late 30s, wearing a plain brown suit and occasionally glancing toward the children as they walked past. Harper could not recall his face in detail, only that he had an off presence, the kind that made people instinctively uneasy. Detectives took her statement seriously, though they lacked further descriptions or leads to trace the man. Another lead emerged from a janitor who worked in the plaza's maintenance department. He mentioned that a delivery truck had arrived unusually early that afternoon, parking near a less trafficked service door. The driver had lingered for several minutes, appearing to check the surrounding area before entering the building. However, he had left promptly, and no one had seen him interact with anyone. Detectives documented the vehicle make and license plate from the janitor's memory, but the details were imprecise, yielding no concrete leads. The media pressure intensified. Newspapers ran daily updates, often sensationalizing minor details. One column speculated about strangers in town, another about the possibility of kidnapping rings exploiting small towns like Pinewood. Price, however, remained focused on verifiable information, reminding his team that speculation could obscure real clues. Yet the barrage of questions and theories only heightened the sense of urgency as residents clamored for answers. Community volunteers organized extensive searches beyond the plaza. Woods, creeks, and abandoned buildings on the outskirts of Pinewood were combed repeatedly. Search parties used tracking dogs, though their ability to detect scents diminished over time. Weeks into the searches, a faint possibility arose when a dog alerted near a creek behind the plaza. Investigators scoured the area but found only litter, fallen branches, and disturbed soil, nothing to indicate the children had been there. The lead, like so many others, ended in frustration. Despite the dead ends, subtle threads of connection began to form. Detective Price considered the timing of the children's disappearance. It occurred during a period when the plaza was busy, yet not crowded enough to provide cover for a casual escape. He theorized that someone who knew the area well could have exploited the children's routine and familiarity with the plaza. The pattern suggested planning rather than spontaneity. Though who could execute such a plan and vanish without leaving a trace remained the central mystery. Local police reported a few additional sightings that could not be corroborated. A bus driver claimed to have seen 3 children resembling the Whitmans near a service road, accompanied by a man matching Mrs. Harper's description. Another witness, a gas station attendant, remembered seeing a similar vehicle parked near the edge of town around the same time. These reports were treated with caution. None provided definitive proof, yet the pattern hinted at movement beyond the plaza. Inside the Whitman home, the absence of the children transformed daily life into a routine of despair and vigilance. Mrs. Whitman would often rise before dawn, walking the streets near the plaza, hoping for a glimpse of her children. George Whitman, once steady and pragmatic, began reviewing police procedures, questioning whether any missteps could have delayed the search. The community rallied, yet each day without news deepened the sense of hopelessness. The months dragged on, and as winter approached, the case became colder in both metaphor and reality. Detective Price continued to pursue leads, consulting with missing children experts from larger cities. They reviewed cases with similarities: abductions in public spaces with minimal witnesses, children who vanished without a struggle, and perpetrators who left no discernible trail. Each case offered small insights, but none yielded actionable strategies for Pinewood. In late November, a breakthrough, albeit minor, arrived in the form of an anonymous letter. The handwriting was careful, precise, and the message brief. "I saw them. Near the old mill road. Do not tell anyone else." Though the letter did not identify the writer, detectives quickly organized a search along Mill Road, a narrow path leading away from the town center, lined with overgrown fields and derelict farm buildings. The search yielded no children, yet investigators discovered footprints, partially obscured by frost, suggesting recent human activity. The prints were inconclusive, possibly animals, possibly someone's boots, but they provided a glimmer of tangible evidence that the children had been moved beyond the immediate vicinity of the plaza. Price documented the letter, noting that whoever sent it possessed awareness of the investigation, enough to provide a clue without revealing themselves. He suspected a witness who feared retribution, or perhaps a person involved indirectly. The psychological complexity added another layer to the case. Whoever had taken the children, or whoever had knowledge, was careful, deliberate, and aware of the consequences of exposure. By the end of 1957, the Whitman case had evolved from a local tragedy to a state-level investigation. Detectives reviewed every possible avenue: abduction, accidental disappearance, mischief gone wrong, or even targeted planning. Yet, as winter deepened, the physical trail grew fainter. The children's absence continued to dominate Pinewood's consciousness. Parents held their children closer, the town grew wary of strangers, and the plaza's once cheerful atmosphere became somber, a reminder of the unresolved horror. Detective Price, aware that time was both an ally and an enemy, vowed to continue the search into the new year. Every lead, no matter how small, would be pursued, every witness re-interviewed. He understood the emotional weight, not only for the Whitmans, but for the entire community. The children's disappearance had transformed a quiet town into a place marked by vigilance, fear, and unanswered questions. The Whitman siblings remained missing, their fates unknown. Yet the investigation was far from over. Evidence, however elusive, continued to emerge in fragments. Witness accounts, faint clues, and occasional sightings suggested movement beyond the plaza, hinting at a network of unknown actions that had carried the children away. Each step forward in the inquiry was met with frustration, yet Detective Price's resolve remained unshaken. He knew that in cases like this, persistence, patient, meticulous, unwavering, was the only weapon against the mystery that had swallowed the Whitman children. And so, the year closed with Pinewood enveloped in uncertainty, the Whitman household haunted by absence, and detectives holding on to the hope that some trace, however small, would one day illuminate the path back to Henry, Michael, and Sarah. The VTT. Pieces of the puzzle were scattered, yet somewhere, in time and space, a thread waited to be discovered, capable of unraveling the mystery that had gripped the town for months. The first snow of December dusted Pinewood with a thin, crisp layer of white, but it did little to soften the unease that had settled over the town. The Whitman household remained a place of quiet torment. George Whitman, once steady and methodical, now carried the weight of sleepless nights, pacing the empty rooms while revisiting every step he and his children had taken at the plaza. Mrs. Whitman's vigil at the window continued, her eyes scanning every passing vehicle, every shadow cast along the street. Outside, neighbors and townsfolk went about their routines, yet the disappearance of the three children permeated every conversation, every cautious glance. Detective Samuel Price and his team intensified their efforts. The anonymous letter pointing to Mill Road had provided a spark of direction, though it had not yielded immediate results. Price believed the next critical step was to focus on individuals who might have had opportunity, knowledge of the plaza, and the means to take the children without detection. Pinewood was a small town. Someone involved would either be local or possess intimate familiarity with its layout. One early morning, Price received a tip from Officer Jenkins, a local patrolman with years of experience. Jenkins mentioned a man named Carl Redding, a drifter who had passed through Pinewood intermittently over the past year. Redding had been observed loitering near the plaza on several occasions, asking about the schedule of local events and appearing unusually interested in the comings and goings of children. While Redding had no criminal record, his presence and behaviors were described as unsettling. Price saw potential value in pursuing this lead, not as an accusation, but as a necessary step in narrowing the possibilities. Detectives located Redding at a boarding house near the edge of town. He was a wiry man in his mid-30s, his eyes darting nervously as Price and two officers approached. Redding protested his innocence immediately, insisting he had been wandering through the town, seeking odd jobs. His account of the day the children disappeared was vague. He claimed to have been in the outskirts, repairing a fence for a farmer. The farmer confirmed hiring a handyman, but could not precisely place Redding during the critical hours. While nothing directly tied him to the Whitman children's disappearance, the interaction left investigators with a sense of unease. Meanwhile, additional evidence emerged from the plaza itself. A maintenance worker recalled seeing a discarded scarf caught in a vent near the service corridor, a place not accessible to the general public. It was small, frayed, and appeared to have been snagged by accident. Forensic examination, limited though it was, revealed traces of the children's hair on the wake fibers. While not conclusive proof of abduction, the discovery indicated that someone may have moved the children through the service corridors, potentially utilizing knowledge of the building's layout to avoid detection. Pressure from the media grew. Reporters camped outside the Whitman home, their presence intrusive and relentless. Headlines questioned the competency of the police, speculated on sinister plots, and sometimes bordered on reckless exaggeration. Detective Price, however, remained focused. He held private briefings with his team, emphasizing the importance of distinguishing between rumor and fact. Yet he could not ignore the growing sense that the abduction, if that was indeed what had occurred, was carried out by someone deliberate, methodical, and patient. A breakthrough came when a local schoolteacher, Miss Evelyn Carter, recalled a peculiar encounter. In late September, she had noticed Henry Whitman conversing with a man outside the schoolyard. The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Logan, had asked innocuous questions about the children's routines, seemingly concerned about safety in the neighborhood. Carter remembered dismissing the interaction at the time, assuming it was a well-meaning adult. However, in retrospect, the timing and the content of the conversation appeared suspicious. Detective Price interviewed Carter thoroughly, and sketches were made based on her recollections. Further complicating matters, a series of letters addressed to the Whitman household began arriving, unsigned, often cryptic, occasionally taunting. Some contained vague references to the children's whereabouts, others offered nothing but obscure warnings. Detectives documented each piece of correspondence meticulously. The handwriting varied slightly, leading Price to hypothesize either multiple writers or an individual deliberately altering their style. Every letter reinforced the unsettling reality that someone was aware of the ongoing investigation and sought to influence it, if only psychologically. The new year arrived with a bitter chill in Pinewood, carrying little comfort for those still haunted by the disappearance of the Whitman siblings. Detective Samuel Price felt the weight of both time and expectation pressing upon him. Each lead carried the potential to resolve the case or to dissolve into another frustrating dead end. For weeks, the investigation had focused on individuals like Carl Redding and Theodore Carmichael, yet no definitive link had emerged. Now, Price considered the possibility that understanding the past of these persons of interest could shed light on the present mystery. Redding's history, though sparse, contained threads of unease. He had drifted across small towns in Pennsylvania for several years, often taking minor laboring jobs but rarely staying long enough for neighbors to establish meaningful familiarity. Some former employers described him as polite, almost unremarkable, while others noted a coldness in his eyes, a detachment that unsettled those around him. Price requested background checks on every town Redding had passed through, cross-referencing reports of missing children or unexplained incidents. Though nothing definitive surfaced, a pattern of transience and curiosity about children and local routines began to emerge. Carmichael, in contrast, had deep roots in Pinewood. He lived on the outskirts, in a weathered house flanked by overgrown fields. Locals described him as reclusive, sometimes hostile, but never overtly violent. He was known to watch from a distance, observing daily life, yet rarely interacting directly. Price noted that Carmichael's interest in the plaza had intensified in the weeks before the disappearance, as reported by multiple witnesses. While there was no record of him approaching the children, his presence at key locations raised concern, particularly given the anonymous letters sent to the Whitman household. Interviews with friends, family, and acquaintances of Carmichael revealed a man obsessed with order and routines. He maintained detailed notes about the town, recording patterns of traffic, business hours, and community events. Though seemingly benign, this meticulousness suggested he could execute a plan requiring both patience and precision. Detectives could not ignore the possibility that Carmichael possessed the means and knowledge to carry out an abduction unnoticed, particularly if he had carefully studied the plaza and its surroundings. Meanwhile, search efforts expanded beyond Pinewood itself. Officers canvassed surrounding towns, revisited Mill Road, and combed nearby forests and abandoned buildings. Reports of sightings continued to trickle in, some credible, some misidentified, but each offered at least the faintest possibility of progress. One farmer reported seeing 3 children resembling the Whitmans near a creek behind his property, accompanied by a man matching descriptions of Redding. Though the sighting could not be confirmed, it prompted renewed searches in the area, illustrating the importance of every fragment of information. Inside the Whitman household, tension and strain deepened. Mrs. Whitman's health began to deteriorate under the weight of sleepless nights, worry, and the relentless focus on missing children bulletins. George Whitman struggled to maintain composure, balancing support for his wife with collaboration with detectives. Their home, once a lively place, had transformed into a site of procedural planning, constant communication with investigators, and relentless anxiety. Visitors came with condolences, tips, and sometimes, in the case of reporters, intrusions that amplified distress rather than alleviating it. A subtle breakthrough emerged when an officer discovered a series of receipts in Carmichael's home, documenting purchases at stores near the plaza on the day of the disappearance. While nothing directly implicated him, the timing aligned with witness accounts and surveillance estimates, suggesting he may have been present near key locations during the children's last known movements. Price approached Carmichael with caution, aware of the delicate balance between suspicion and evidence. Carmichael denied involvement, offering alibis that were difficult to verify fully, but also difficult to disprove. At the same time, Small but crucial forensic details began to take shape. Items collected from the plaza's service corridors, threads, hair, and smudges, underwent examination using the techniques available in 1957. Although primitive by modern standards, these analyses hinted at contact with unknown individuals, potentially connecting the environment to persons of interest. Price emphasized the importance of patience. Every fragment, however minor, could guide the investigation toward meaningful conclusions. The psychological dimensions of the case also grew more pronounced. Anonymous letters continued to arrive, some referencing events only the perpetrator could have known. Detectives considered whether these communications were intended to intimidate, mislead, or taunt, yet each letter offered subtle clues, timing, phrasing, and handwriting patterns that suggested deliberate construction. Price theorized that a single individual could be responsible, carefully manipulating perception while avoiding detection. As winter deepened, the investigation began to reveal fractures within the team itself. Pressure from the Whitmans, public scrutiny, and the sheer difficulty of the case created tensions. Differences in strategy emerged. Some officers advocated for aggressive public appeals, others favored discreet surveillance and evidence gathering. Price navigated these conflicts, maintaining focus on the central objective, locating Henry, Michael, and Sarah Whitman. In mid-January, a breakthrough occurred when a local child provided a sketch of a man seen near the plaza on the day of the disappearance. The drawing bore similarities to descriptions of both Redding and Carmichael. While not definitive, the sketch became another piece of the puzzle, emphasizing the need to reconcile witness observations with documented movements. Detectives revisited statements, cross-referenced times and locations, and attempted to reconstruct a plausible timeline. The investigation's complexity highlighted both the cunning of whoever had taken the children and the limitations of 1957 investigative methods. The absence of surveillance technology, reliance on eyewitness memory, and rudimentary forensic tools complicated the pursuit. Yet each step, interview, search, analysis, brought the team incrementally closer to understanding how the disappearance had unfolded. By the end of January, Detective Price compiled a tentative profile. The perpetrator was likely local or familiar with Pinewood, capable of patient observation, willing to manipulate the environment, and aware of the children's routines. Both Redding and Carmichael fit parts of this profile, though neither could be conclusively linked to the act of abduction. The case remained a delicate balance of observation, deduction, and the pursuit of small, tangible clues that could provide a breakthrough. The Whitman family, now approaching 6 months without their children, continued their daily vigil. Each day brought a mixture of hope and despair, small gestures of routine punctuated by anxiety. George Whitman visited the plaza regularly, retracing potential paths, attempting to understand the environment from which his children had vanished. Mrs. Whitman clung to reports of sightings, minor discoveries, and communications from investigators, willing herself to believe that each day could bring news, good or bad, about their children's whereabouts. The disappearance had become more than a local mystery. It had evolved into a test of persistence, resilience, and meticulous attention to detail. Pinewood's residents lived under the shadow of uncertainty, acutely aware that ordinary routines, trips to the store, walks in the park, could be disrupted by forces beyond their understanding. Detective Price, committed to uncovering the truth, pressed on with methodical diligence, aware that even the smallest clue could lead to answers long overdue. By late January, the Whitman case had established a rhythm of investigation, reporting, and observation. Each element, anonymous letters, witness sketches, potential suspects, forensic traces, was cataloged and analyzed. The network of leads, though fragmented, provided the scaffolding upon which the next stage of inquiry would be built. Detective Price remained vigilant, conscious that the children's safety, the family's peace, and the town's trust depended upon unraveling the mystery that had consumed half a year of Pinewood's life. As February approached, the sense of anticipation was palpable. Investigators, family, and community alike were poised at the edge of discovery, aware that months of persistence might soon yield a breakthrough or further complicate an already intricate puzzle. And somewhere in the pattern of events, a solution, however elusive, awaited. tethered to careful observation, patient deduction, and relentless pursuit of truth. The disappearance of the Whitman siblings, now half a year old, remained unresolved, yet the threads of investigation, meticulously documented and cautiously followed, had begun to suggest a path forward. The delicate interplay of witness accounts, behavioral profiles, and environmental clues hinted at the possibility that Henry, Michael, and Sarah might yet be found, or that the identity of their abductor could be revealed, providing long-awaited clarity to a town gripped by uncertainty and sorrow. By early February, the Whitman case had become both a pressing concern and a delicate operation. Detective Samuel Price and his team were acutely aware that time, while revealing in some respects, could also erase opportunities. Every lead, every tip, and every fragment of evidence had to be approached with precision. Months had passed since Henry, Michael, and Sarah Whitman disappeared, and while Pinewood maintained a veneer of normalcy, the tension in the town was palpable. Price convened his team in a small room at the county sheriff's office, maps, sketches, and photographs spread across the table. The anonymous letters had provided crucial, albeit ambiguous, directions, while sightings and minor discoveries suggested the children had been moved deliberately and carefully. The detective emphasized the need to cross-reference every detail: times, locations, witness statements, and potential suspects. The objective was clear: determine a plausible chain of events and identify the person responsible. Attention returned to Carl Redding and Theodore Carmichael. Investigators had conducted repeated surveillance, interviewed acquaintances, and verified alibis as thoroughly as possible. Redding's history of transient movement made it difficult to confirm his whereabouts precisely, but his presence near Pinewood during critical periods could not be ruled out. Carmichael, by contrast, was stationary, his home and habits thoroughly documented, yet his behavior, meticulous routines, and prior observations near the plaza suggested he remained a key figure in the investigation. A breakthrough emerged when a local delivery man came forward with additional details about the dark sedan observed near the plaza. He provided a description of the license plate, partial though it was, and noted the man associated with the vehicle appeared unusually composed, scanning the entrances while maintaining a calm demeanor. Price noted the alignment of this observation with prior witness accounts of a man loitering near service corridors. While not conclusive, the information provided a tangible link connecting the vehicle, an individual, and the timing of the children's disappearance. Simultaneously, the analysis of forensic evidence progressed. Threads, hair fibers, and smudges collected from service corridors and adjacent areas were cataloged and compared against known samples from the Whitman children. Though primitive by modern standards, this analysis suggested interaction in key locations consistent with abduction. The presence of multiple fragments implied that whoever was responsible had moved through the environment with knowledge of hidden or underutilized spaces. Detective Price considered the implications. The abductor was not random, but deliberate, patient, and familiar with the town's infrastructure. Witness accounts continued to yield subtle insights. A young girl whose home backed onto the plaza's parking lot reported seeing a man carrying a bundle on the afternoon of the disappearance. Though she could not identify the contents, Price inferred that this might indicate movement of the children away from public view. Investigators conducted searches along potential routes, including Mill Road, surrounding fields, and abandoned buildings, yet no direct trace was found. Every effort underscored the challenge. The perpetrator had anticipated discovery and acted to avoid leaving overt evidence. Inside the Whitman household, the strain was nearly unbearable. Mrs. Whitman, frail and exhausted, struggled with the emotional toll of months without her children. George Whitman, though determined to maintain composure, frequently revisited the plaza, attempting to reconstruct the afternoon, questioning whether some overlooked detail could unlock the mystery. Neighbors offered support, yet the pervasive sense of helplessness persisted. Each day, the absence of news weighed heavier, and hope became intertwined with anxiety. Pressure from the media intensified, with newspapers running weekly updates and broadcasting the story statewide. Some reporters attempted to draw connections between Redding, Carmichael, and other local figures, often bordering on speculation. Price, however, maintained focus, reminding his team to prioritize evidence over conjecture. The challenge lay not only in finding the children, but in filtering the noise that threatened to obscure actionable leads. By mid-February, surveillance and investigative efforts began to converge on a cluster of locations tied to Carmichael. His residence, nearby abandoned barns, and the perimeter of his property revealed patterns suggesting he could have transported or hidden individuals without attracting attention. Detectives observed his movements discreetly, noting unusual behaviors, frequent trips to the outskirts, a marked attention to vehicles entering and leaving the town, and intermittent contact with unknown individuals. Though circumstantial, the alignment of these observations with prior leads elevated Carmichael's relevance in the case. In parallel, Officer Jenkins identified a series of small anomalies in the town's postal records. Letters sent anonymously to the Whitman family, some postmarked locally, hinted at an intimate knowledge of both the investigation and the children's routines. Price theorized that these correspondences, intended to mislead or taunt, may have originated from someone within close proximity, potentially Carmichael or an associate. Each letter was meticulously analyzed for linguistic patterns, handwriting characteristics, and postal origins. On February 21st, a critical event occurred. Surveillance of Carmichael's property revealed unusual activity during the early morning hours. A vehicle matching the description of the dark sedan was observed entering the property, remaining briefly, then departing. Detectives monitored the location covertly, recording behavior patterns and potential interactions with unknown individuals. Though no definitive evidence of the children's presence was obtained, the timing and context were consistent with prior reports and sightings, suggesting the possibility of ongoing concealment or movement of the abducted siblings. The Whitmans, informed cautiously of developments, experienced a mixture of hope and renewed anxiety. Every potential lead carried emotional weight, balancing anticipation against the risk of disappointment. George Whitman meticulously documented observations, timelines, and interactions with investigators, contributing to the collective effort while managing personal despair. Mrs. Whitman, though physically weakened, continued to participate in review sessions, offering insights into the children's routines, behaviors, and potential vulnerabilities. By late February, Detective Price's team had synthesized the accumulated evidence into a coherent, though tentative, narrative. The children had been observed leaving public view in proximity to the plaza, likely facilitated by someone with both knowledge and opportunity. Witnesses, anonymous letters, and surveillance indicated deliberate action to obscure movement and avoid detection. Both Redding and Carmichael remained persons of interest, with Carmichael's stationary residence and observed patterns suggesting greater access and potential capability. The investigative team prepared a coordinated effort to surveil key locations continuously, with officers stationed strategically around Carmichael's property, nearby abandoned barns, and peripheral roads leading from the town. The objective was to observe activity that might indicate movement or concealment of the children. Though the probability of success was uncertain, Price emphasized the importance of sustained patient observation. During this period, subtle developments arose from local community members. Neighbors reported unusual behaviors, late-night movements, unfamiliar vehicles parked briefly near barns, and fleeting interactions with unknown persons. While none provided conclusive evidence, the aggregation of observations reinforced the theory that the children were being held, moved, or monitored within a defined network of locations near Pinewood. By the end of February, the case had reached a precarious point. Months of investigation, interviews, surveillance, and evidence gathering had built a detailed yet incomplete picture. Price recognized that the next phase required careful coordination, the convergence of surveillance, strategic interviews, and forensic review. The goal was to transform circumstantial patterns into actionable intelligence, identifying both location and perpetrator with sufficient certainty to recover Henry, Michael, and Sarah Whitman safely. The tension in Pinewood remained high. Families, neighbors, and local authorities understood that the next breakthrough could come suddenly or remain elusive indefinitely. The Whitmans continued their vigil, holding on to hope tempered by months of frustration and uncertainty. Detective Price, mindful of both public scrutiny and procedural necessity, prepared to execute a strategic plan aimed at narrowing focus, confirming suspicions, and ultimately locating the children. The disappearance of the Whitman siblings, now approaching 7 months, had evolved into a complex interplay of human behavior, careful planning, and methodical investigation. Each lead, observation, and forensic trace contributed to a growing but incomplete understanding. Pinewood, a town once defined by routine and simplicity, now lived in a state of vigilance, forever marked by the absence of 3 young lives and the painstaking pursuit of answers that had consumed months of effort, attention, and emotional investment. March arrived in Pinewood with an unexpected warmth, a deceptive calm that belied the tension gripping the town. For Detective Samuel Price and his team, the months of painstaking investigation were approaching a critical phase. Surveillance, interviews, forensic analysis, and witness accounts had gradually coalesced into a clearer picture, one that suggested both the perpetrator's identity and potential location of the Whitman children. Carmichael remained under discreet observation. Detectives stationed near his property noted patterns: brief vehicle arrivals, movements during early morning hours, and interactions with unknown individuals. While previously ambiguous, these behaviors now formed a rhythm, suggesting deliberate coordination and concealment. Price hypothesized that the children, if still alive, might be in a location accessible via Carmichael's network of barns, storage sheds, or secluded outbuildings. The breakthrough came from combining 2 previously unconnected pieces of evidence. First, the sketch provided by the young witness months earlier, describing a man seen near the plaza with the children, matched closely to Carmichael. Second, subtle postal discrepancies in the anonymous letters revealed a pattern consistent with delivery routes near his property. While circumstantial, the convergence of independent observations increased the probability that Carmichael was central to the disappearance. Acting cautiously, Price secured a search warrant for Carmichael's residence and outbuildings, ensuring legal authority for entry and seizure. Officers were positioned strategically around the perimeter, prepared for all contingencies. George and Mrs. Whitman, informed of the developments, experienced a mixture of hope and apprehension. Months of uncertainty had eroded much of their strength, yet a faint optimism took root. They had been waiting for a lead like this for nearly 8 months. The search began early in the morning. Officers moved methodically, clearing structures one by one. Inside the main residence, rooms were meticulously examined, revealing personal effects, notes, and correspondence, but no immediate sign of the children. Price remained focused on the outbuildings, barns, storage sheds, and a small detached workshop that had previously been overlooked due to its apparent inactivity. It was in the smallest of these buildings, a weathered wooden shed at the far end of the property, that investigators discovered subtle but undeniable signs. Small clothing items matching the Whitmans' descriptions, faint impressions in the dust suggesting recent movement, and minor traces of hair fibers consistent with those previously collected from the plaza. The evidence pointed convincingly to the presence of the children at some point, though whether they remained there was initially unknown. Detective Price and a tactical team proceeded with caution. They entered the shed systematically, noting structural features and potential concealment areas. In a back corner, partially obscured by stacked crates and old furniture, they found the children, alive, though frightened, hungry, and emotionally shaken. Henry, Michael, and Sarah Whitman were huddled together, each child exhibiting signs of fatigue and distress, but no serious physical harm. The relief among officers and family members was immediate and overwhelming. The Whitmans were quickly reunited with their children outside the shed, the emotional reunion a mixture of tears, relief, and disbelief. Months of anguish melted away in the intensity of the moment, yet the investigation was far from concluded. Carmichael was taken into custody without incident, questioned thoroughly regarding his involvement, motives, and potential accomplices. While he initially denied direct involvement, evidence from the shed, correspondence, and surveillance indicated otherwise. Price's team conducted detailed interviews, reconstructing the sequence of events. the abduction from the plaza, movement through service corridors, concealment in local outbuildings, and periodic observation or manipulation of community perception via letters and anonymous tips. Carmichael's meticulous nature had allowed him to evade detection for months, yet the accumulation of small clues, combined with patient investigation and community cooperation, ultimately led to discovery. The resolution of the case had profound effects on Pinewood. The community, once gripped by fear and uncertainty, experienced a collective relief tempered by the realization of vulnerability. Parents became more vigilant, local authorities reviewed security measures, and the Whitman family's ordeal became a touchstone for discussions about child safety and community awareness. Detective Price, while celebrated for his methodical approach and persistence, remained focused on procedural lessons. Documenting evidence, maintaining surveillance, and coordinating with families had been critical to the successful outcome. In the aftermath, the Whitmans gradually returned to a semblance of normal life. Emotional recovery was ongoing, months of trauma left lasting effects, yet the children received care, attention, and support from professionals and the community. Media coverage acknowledged the resolution, highlighting the persistence of investigators, the cooperation of witnesses, and the importance of following even the faintest leads. While public interest waned over time, Pinewood never fully forgot the event. The disappearance and eventual recovery of Henry, Michael, and Sarah Whitman remained etched in the town's collective memory. Carmichael faced legal proceedings, and the case provided a detailed study and abduction investigation, emphasizing both the psychological and procedural aspects of such crimes. His arrest and the recovery of the children reinforced the importance of meticulous attention to detail, patience, and the integration of multiple evidence sources. The Whitman siblings' disappearance, spanning 8 months of uncertainty, fear, and relentless investigation, ultimately concluded with a resolution that brought relief, justice, and enduring lessons. Detective Price reflected on the months of effort, the careful cross-referencing of witness accounts, the analysis of physical traces, the interpretation of seemingly trivial anomalies, and recognized that the culmination was the product of patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment to truth. Pinewood, scarred but resilient, continued its routines. Parents remained watchful, children played under closer supervision, and the plaza, once a site of vanished innocence, slowly regained its ordinary rhythm. The Whitman family, though marked by trauma, embraced each day with renewed appreciation, the experience shaping their lives in profound but ultimately life-affirming ways. The case, now closed, served as both cautionary tale and testament to careful investigation. It underscored the capacity of a determined individual working within the bounds of procedure to restore lost lives, even in the face of elaborate concealment and prolonged uncertainty. And in the hearts of those who had waited, hoped, and worked tirelessly, the reunion of Henry, Michael, and Sarah Whitman represented the enduring power of perseverance, vigilance, and the relentless pursuit of justice in a world that could sometimes take far too long to reveal the truth.
Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next videos, where we continue to follow the mysteries that have never slept. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned